In my personal opinion, the best way to experience Queer is to have Julia Roberts come out and introduce the film and say it's one of the best things she's seen all year.
It's going to be, this is how you're going to measure time now. Before you saw Queer and after you saw Queer.
Hi, I'm Lady Genevieve, and on my channel, I talk about entertainment media. Today's video is going to be a review of the new Luca Guadagnino film, Queer, starring Daniel Craig as William Lee, the protagonist of the book by William Burroughs. I was invited to a special screening of the film hosted by Julia Roberts, and afterwards, Daniel Craig and Luca Guadagnino got on stage to speak a bit about the film. I will include those videos at the end of this video. Since this invitation came last minute and I was busy prepping other videos at that moment, I didn't have time to finish reading the book all the way through before I saw the film, although I did read through an extremely lengthy introduction as well as the first few chapters. And I also watched some interviews about the film and skimmed some trivia about the author, so I did have some introduction to the material before I had my first viewing. Now I have finished the audiobook post-viewing, so for this review I will cover Queer in a manner similar to how I do my other opening weekend film reviews, where I begin with a mostly spoiler-free section, and then I will have a spoiler section, and you as the viewer can decide how far you would like to go into spoiler territory. Queer is a film that begins in the 1950s in Mexico City and focuses on a man named William Lee. That's Daniel Craig's character, and he becomes infatuated with a younger man named Eugene Allerton. In going through the book's introduction, there was a lot of information about this story being a highly personal one for the author, who also struggled with addiction, and also wrote about these experiences in another book of his called Junkie. Queer is said to be somewhat of a sequel to that book, but again, I didn't even have time to finish reading Queer before I saw the film, so I definitely didn't have time to also read that other book before all of this came out. The film largely focuses on this yearning Lee has for this younger man, played by Starkey, Lee's struggles with addiction, and to be quite honest, Queer doesn't feel like a film where plot spoilers are as much of an issue to worry about. I'm not saying that the film is uneventful, but more so that the film is really about experiencing the mood, emotions, and atmosphere, and it's impossible to spoil a feeling. Having a person that reviews films describe a feeling to you is never going to be the exact same as feeling that feeling for yourself. There are often sequences in the film with little to no dialogue, but you can still observe and learn something about a character or characters being presented. If we begin at the most superficial level, visually this film is gorgeous. Luca is so artistic in his presentation as a filmmaker, and I really appreciated the warmth of the film's color palette. When it comes to things like the production design, costumes, cinematography, really I simply cannot fault any of these visual elements. I really enjoyed the film, but before I go into more specifics, I do want to say that if you are the type of viewer that needs things to be spelled out in a very literal, matter-of-fact delivery, this might not be the right fit for you. I would assume that if you're watching this review, you're the type of viewer that is open to watching a film that is artistic and surreal and conveying certain feelings and emotions, but if you're trying to figure out, should I bring so-and-so with me to watch this at the cinema, but that person you have in mind is averse to anything more abstract and surreal, and you think that they're just going to annoy you by complaining afterwards that Queer was too esoteric for them to understand, maybe that wouldn't be the right person for you to bring along to watch this. Just as an example of what I'm referring to, when Lee is beginning to hang out with this man he's interested in, Allerton, they do this thing more than once where you see the two characters seated near one another, but then you will also see this translucent version of Lee overlaid on the space between them. It will either be his arm reaching out towards Allerton or him leaning in as if he would like to rest his head on his shoulder, things like that. That's a way of showing the audience that Lee longs and yearns for Allerton without having Lee communicate these things through dialogue. And although that might be more simple of a concept for viewers to understand, there are other things in the film that become far more abstract in their delivery. It's always beautiful to look at, but if that's not your thing, fair enough. There is a strong sense of melancholy lingering throughout this film, but I also think that there's such a strong reverence and yearning for romantic love that keeps the viewing experience from becoming too dreary. There weren't any bad performances, but of course I have to give extra praise to Daniel Craig. I especially appreciated his physicality in his performance, just the details of how he walks and carries himself. It's such a massive part of making this performance truly transformative. And I want to give a special honorable mention to Jason Schwartzman, who was excellent as a comedic side character, Joe, who is friends with Lee. I will not spoil the specifics, but Joe has a recurring problem that he never seems to learn from, and that, combined with Jason Schwartzman's comedic delivery, made him a reliable source of laughs anytime he would pop up in a scene. Overall, I would recommend the film to anyone that wants to watch a beautifully artistic love story, anyone that's a fan of any of the lead performers, or Luca specifically as a filmmaker, and anyone that wants to support films that aren't a corporate product designed solely to build a money laundering machine. Oops, sorry, I meant to say a franchise.
Not a joke, just a fact.
But now let's start to get into plot spoilers. The first detail I want to note is that overall I prefer the film above the book, but if you enjoy the film and want to dive into more details about the material, I would recommend that you read the book because there were certain details that were clarified by reading that book. Just as one example, there's a part about midway through the runtime where Lee is experiencing what I thought was a sort of a dream sequence with these abstract, surreal flashes of his surroundings and glimpses of various characters from this story. When I was watching the film for the first time, I thought that this was a dream sequence. However, once I listened to the audiobook, they described this portion of the story as him being in a bit of a haze, and that let me know that this wasn't a dream, but actually a fairly accurate way of depicting how Lee is going through his life and experiencing, or I suppose not fully experiencing, his surroundings. Whether you attribute that to his issues with addiction or heartbreak over not being romantically embraced by Allerton the way that he might yearn for, that's probably open to interpretation. But overall, if I were to narrow things down to just one, the main reason why I prefer the film is because I found it to be considerably more romantic in its delivery. When I read the book, there was a much more cynical vibe about things, and Lee often came across more creepy and lecherous. It was just much easier to fall in love with Lee when it was Daniel Craig playing him, because Daniel Craig is that stellar of an actor, and it's easy to fall in love with the characters he plays.
It makes no damn sense. Compels me, though.
Lee and Allerton in the book often felt more unrequited. The film does show Allerton's temperamental side, and he'll oscillate between hot and cold, but Luca really leaned into that relationship as loving and romantic too. One example of that is the shots of the legs. There's a part of the story where Lee is suffering from withdrawals because he doesn't have consistent access to the substances he likes to partake in. In the book, I think it's referred to as junk sickness, and this is after they've gone to South America together. So it's late one night, and in the film, Lee asks to get in bed with Allerton because the hotel room they have is one with two small single beds. Lee is shivering while Allerton is fine. If I'm remembering correctly, there's a more stark contrast between them in the film than in the book. Perhaps that was done to really emphasize how significant Lee's addiction is. And Luca has the camera. I don't remember if it panned down or if it was a jump cut, but we were able to get this lingering shot of their legs curled up with one another. And it's a moment that has significant meaning and weight because they do a callback to that moment at the very end of the film. I will talk about that a little bit further on in the review, so just bear with me. Even the way that Daniel and Drew are acting in scenes with one another, unless it's a moment where Allerton is being more cold and distant in his hot and cold behavior, there's definitely more tenderness in multiple scenes that they have together, and that mutual tenderness was not something I really felt from reading the book. Another difference is the ayahuasca, which for the rest of the review I'm simply going to refer to as the substance for two reasons. One, I don't want YouTube's automatic systems to ding me by misinterpreting me as condoning something when all I'm doing is talking about what was happening in a fictional film. And number two, The Substance was one of my favorite films this year. I actually did a review of that over on my Patreon, and I will take that moment to thank my patrons for all of their support. Lee is interested in getting access to the substance and partaking in it because he's interested in telepathy and believes the substance will grant him access to that. He's a bit of an eccentric that believes in various supernatural things, or at least that's something I might be projecting further onto the text because the author of the book was interested and believed in various magical supernatural things. So in the film, Lee and Allerton not only go off in search of this substance, but they find it and they take it, and the film uses a fair amount of time to flesh out what it is that they experience on that trip. There's this really beautiful dance number that Daniel and Drew did and performed so well a dance number that was merged with a very clever VFX design where the characters are shown to be merging in and out of one another's bodies. You also hear Allerton say something that I believe was a line first uttered by Lee. Allerton, while tripping, his internal voice can be heard saying that he's not queer, he's disembodied. Lee had previously said this line while he was either under the influence of something or perhaps he was dreaming. Probably the former, but I don't entirely remember the details, although I did take a fair few pages of notes that I scribbled in the dark while watching this, as I always do when I see a film with the intention of doing a review of it. And I think the reason for this is to convey the parallels in their journeys. In an earlier portion of the film, Lee talks about being horrified when he realized that particular detail of himself. It's a highly potent internalized homophobia, exactly as you would expect to see from someone growing up in this time period. And Allerton is much younger than Lee, so maybe he hasn't reached whatever place Lee has about that part of himself. The film also has an epilogue that I would like to talk about a bit. Lee returns to Mexico where he's reunited with his friend Joe. That's Jason Schwartzman's character, the funny one. Joe lets Lee know that Allerton had been back in Mexico somewhat recently, but he has gone south once again with another older man. He told Joe he was going to meet up with Lee, but Lee hadn't heard anything from Allerton. And there's this dream sequence where Lee sees himself going into a hotel room like we saw him do earlier in the film with men to hook up with. And while inside that room, he sees Allerton place a glass on top of his head, and Lee removes his gun from his holster. It's one that he always carries with him, and he shoots as if it's a game, you know, a bit like when people shoot a bow and arrow through an apple that is perched on top of someone's cranium. But Lee doesn't hit the glass. He hits Allerton instead. This is a reference to the author, Burroughs, having done that exact thing to his wife in real life. And this was a bit of trivia that I had read before I saw the film, and I'm glad that I had read that because I cannot imagine how much more confusing that scene would have been if I wasn't aware of that trivia beforehand. So I interpreted that scene as an artistic rendering of the things Lee/Burroughs is haunted by. He's haunted by the tragic events surrounding the death of his wife, and he's also haunted by having loved and lost. By the way, there's a lot of material about the varying accounts of how Burroughs' wife died. I myself am not a scholar of that topic, so I'm not going to claim which version of that is the absolute truth, if the truth is even something that can be determined with 100% certainty. But the ending also jumps to a much older version of Lee. We'll just guess that he was in his 80s because that's how old Burroughs was when he passed away. And you see him alone in a room. He goes and lays down in bed, and we see a glimpse of his legs with what are clearly supposed to be the legs of Allerton. And it's so heartbreaking, but also really romantic that they've ended it on this note where that love is something that has stayed with him for his entire life. And that ending feels like something that could be divisive. It's a highly emotional ending, so you could perceive it as something very tragic because they are not shown to end up together to skip off into the sunset. Or you could first and foremost experience that ending as romantic because of the decidedly more romantic presentation of it compared to how it was in the book. When you see that ending after you've seen the revised version of the story with the psychedelic dance number in the rainforest, I can only experience this ending as something romantic. That dance number and the way that Daniel and Drew perform it, to me, it feels like an explicit declaration that there is love, that it is mutual, and that love is a gift to experience. And I love watching love stories. I really do. All my regular viewers know this. And now having a multitude of tidbits of information from the film itself, the audiobook, the panel I sat through with Luca and Daniel, video interviews, print articles, this ending feels like the most romantic way to be true to the story. To share some extra random bits of feedback, another detail I want to praise about this film is the soundtrack. When Daniel Craig was walking in slow motion to Nirvana, oh, I felt some things. Many things, as a matter of fact, because to me, that was cinema. The artsy swimming shots at the beach when Lee and Allerton are underwater. Thank you, Luca, for scratching my Avatar itch because I have to wait yet another year for Avatar 3 to come out. So you were serving me romantic visuals underwater that was very Metcaina coded of you, and I appreciated that greatly. There were so many instances of fantastic camera work, and I love Luca for doing that. If you saw that first promotional clip they released where Daniel Craig goes into the bar to order a drink, that's a prime example of it. Or even the really long take when Lee has just injected himself with a substance and the camera's just holding on Daniel Craig pig who is emoting so many things without uttering a single word. And you see so much playing out on his face before he gradually succumbs to the effects of what he just took. I really wish more streaming originals would take note of things like those, because so many of them come across as cheap and rushed in their presentation. I understand that some of those projects might not have all of the gear for big sweeping shots that would require cranes or any other expensive equipment, but you're telling me you cannot do a long uninterrupted take in one of these projects? Let the actor or actors challenge themselves, and they would be excited by the challenge and they'll want to prove themselves. And then we as the audience, we would really get to see them pushing themselves as performers. Anyway, that's a whole other tangent, but I think there's plenty that can be learned from watching films like these. For anyone that is misinformed enough to believe that nowadays movie theaters are only playing big franchise films, that's simply incorrect. There are still so many unique, artistic, original works of art. And I include Queer in this, even though it's based on a book. It is a work of art. It's not a corporate product. And I love to get to support films like these.
A special screening of Queer, the San Francisco premiere for it. I know you're not here to see me, but I know that you're here. I know that you want to hear from a very special guest tonight. Julia, please come up. Julia Roberts.
Well, I'm so happy you guys are here. You are in for, I was going to say treat, but that's not the word. You are in for such a beautiful experience. And I'm just so happy to live in a time and in a world where this kind of art exists and these kind of artists exist. And Luca Guadagnino has changed the last year of my life in such incredible, beautiful ways. And one of those ways was seeing this film. And so it's gonna be, this is how you're gonna measure time now. Before you saw Queer and after you saw Queer. So buckle up. It's not, this ain't no rom-com. But Daniel just said, yes it is. Well, you be the judge and get back to us. But I'm gonna give it to these beautiful artists to come out and say hello and just, yeah, hold on tight to one another. And with no more talking from me, Daniel Craig and Luca Guadagnino.
Hello, good evening. Thank
evening.
you, Julia.
Thank you so much. That's wonderful. I don't know how we follow that, really.
Well, we just
Yes.
enjoy and
Exactly.
enjoy it.
I think so.
Who wrote the book? Who wrote the book?
Burroughs.
No, who read the book? Anyway,
Glad you're there.
come back, please. Anyway, reading, watch the movie, and then we talk afterwards.
I think
right?
so. I think that's the way to do it. And we can't follow that amazing introduction. Enjoy. All our love is in this film, so enjoy.
Enjoy. Yeah.
Hi everyone. Thank you for staying for the Q&A with Luca Guadagnino and Daniel Craig. Please come up to the stage. Luca, you crafted such an amazing film. Thank you. I've seen it twice, and I'm just curious to know, what inspired you to take this project on? I mean, it's William Burroughs. It's considered an unfinished book, and I just wanted to know, the whole path of, how you took it on and how long it took you to make this.
Good evening. Thank you for being here. Things happen in multiple levels and on multiple timelines, I would say. I would not be able to find the moment in which things became for this movie, other than thinking that there were many times in which I had wanted to make the movie for different reasons. The first was when I read the book and I was 17, and I had this magic encounter with this magical writer who taught me not only the lack of boundary in interaction with the other, but also taught me what it meant to create something with words and have this imagery that was so vivid and unique that I was not at the time aware of or ready to encounter. And then I thought about this book for many, many times, many, many years, until the opportunity to get the rights became. And it's a few encounters that have made this book happen to me. One is, this movie happened, one is with Justin Kuritzkes, with whom I was working on the making of Challengers. We were in
His other movie.
Yeah. Can I have some water, by the way? And that was one thing that I was so I was such a beautiful encounter with this wonderful writer. We were that I felt the urgency to share with him my passion for the book, and to investigate yet another time if the rights were available, and they were, and that's when I involved him.
But did you feel like you had to complete a story?
No, because I don't think we do need to complete the story. It's interesting because like the book is unfinished, but not totally unfinished, because he suspends the narrative when they meet Dr. Cotter. When they meet Cotter, Cotter doesn't give them ayahuasca. And they go away from the jungle, and that's where they separate. And then they have there is an epilogue where they meet again, and the epilogue is slightly different. There is a routine about Skip Tracer, which is a rhetorical figure in Burroughs that we didn't want to go for. But everything else, in one way, to get them to take the ayahuasca was important in our perspectives, because it meant to pay justice to the beautiful modesty of Burroughs, who has spent 35 years hiding from the book and not wanting the book to be published, because as the wonderful Oliver Harris, our literary consultant, who is the greatest scholar of Burroughs, told us, and we understood that this book was too close to him, and he was a very shy person, thank you, and he couldn't really come to grasp the profound, shattering experience that the love for his real life, Eugene Allerton, meant for him to share it with the world. He was nudged to share it by his partner, James Grierholz.
Daniel, I worked with you 27 years ago. God. One Love is the Devil,
Right.
where you played the object of desire to Derek Jacobi's Francis Bacon. Now you are the kind of older gentleman chasing after a younger man.
Yes.
Your portrayal, and you're channeling a lot of William Burroughs. And I just want to get a sense of, how did you get that training? Did you listen to tapes of Burroughs? Did you watch footage of him? Did you read his writings? I'm just curious what inspired you for this role, because it feels so accurate.
Oh, well, thank you. All of the above, of course. I mean, but what fascinated me most was the Burroughs that I saw in interview when he was talking very seriously about literature and science fiction, whatever it was. But this sort of persona that I thought was a persona, it felt like a persona to me. And I had to believe I wasn't going to do that person. I didn't think that person was going to be very interesting in a movie. So the real person, and thankfully there are just some rare kind of bits of footage of him relaxing and at home, shooting things mainly, but relaxing and high and shooting things. And there's that, and those were the bits I keyed into. And I was nervous about doing that. I was really, before I got to set, I was really in both worlds. I was going, do I go this far? I really didn't know what to do, and I didn't tell Luca any of this. But because I knew but actually what happened is, and it happened the first day of shooting, and we settled in, and it became more apparent that it could be both. It could just be all of those things. I didn't have to tie anything down.
Got it. So,
Don't lose your questions.
yes. John Waters, who's a friend of yours.
It's so close, John.
Yes. He's a friend of all of
No, I'd
ours.
like to think of him as my friend. That would be nice.
He just wants to ask, between the two of you, was there any difficult material for you to shoot in this film together? Was there anything that really was, where you said, no, I wouldn't do it, or was there any uncomfortable situations?
I would say not at all, right?
Not even slightly.
Not even remotely.
No.
It was a very relaxing, familial environment, I would say.
Well, I'm sure you had an intimacy coach.
We cannot talk about that.
You just get me into trouble when you talk about it. Like, I banned them from set. I didn't ban them from set. I might have moved them away slightly. They're staring at
You know how it works with intimacy coordinators, right? They want to talk alone with the actors so that they can let them understand how to feel relaxed. So I went to Daniel and Drew and said, we want to talk to you. And they said, only in your presence.
yes.
And the following moment was that when we were starting shooting, some of the little kisses in, she wanted to go to the set, and he said, no, out.
Yeah.
It was fun.
Yeah. It's not strictly speaking true, but she was very nice, and she was a dancer, and she understood movement. She was so she was kind of not. She was very kind of good to have around, but. You don't believe me, do you? It was fine, but we didn't need it. Listen, you need one there for obvious reasons. It's a really important thing to have an intimacy coordinator on set. Don't get me wrong, but it's. I think we were all three grown men.
The very important thing also is that you and Drew had spent so much time rehearsing ayahuasca dancing in your underwear that there was no reason. Otherwise, you would have had the intimacy coordinator on rehearsals.
Yes, true.
Strange world we live in.
Yeah.
Was there anything you were afraid to ask Daniel to do?
No, because when we spoke about the movie for the first time, I felt the immediate connection with Daniel and profound intellectual and emotional understanding of what we both jointly wanted to do, which was ultimately a love story, and that was it. And I felt that once we were there, right? And it's also you build in time, like you start to get to know each other, you make the first costume fitting, things that make you become more and more intimate, and you know that if you are intuitive of the other, you understand who you have in front of you, I would say. And the people that we were to one another, I guess, were companions. So that's what happened. We became motivated to make something that we felt very strong about.
Luca, this comes from Michael Barker from Sony Classics, who gave me a question to ask you on stage. And I'm sorry, what it is he says, Luca, you're the master at casting as you continue to amaze us with your choices. Daniel, of course, is one, but how did you come up with the decision to cast Lesley Manville in that crazy outside-the-box role? It's the most boldest and most brilliant choice of casting we've seen in ages.
Well, Lesley is one of the great actors, and I always wanted to work with her. And
Cotter was a man.
was a man in the book. And so I asked, she said yes.
No one ever says no to Luca.
Daniel, what would you take away from this movie as like the thing that you've obviously been James Bond. You've added kind of a real sexual ambivalence to the new James Bond. But what would you take away from this movie?
I mean, it may be too soon to know that. I mean, I know that I wanted to work with this man for a long, long time, and we've been watching the movies he's been making with just awe, and because of for obvious reasons, because They're so beautifully creative and mad, and I wanted to work with him, and to get the chance to do this, which on paper seems sort of this huge challenge, but as soon as I read it, I just felt so connected to it, and so I thought, this is in my wheelhouse. Luca will be with me. We're going to be okay. And you know, I say this. I mean, I'm quite a tight-assed Englishman, and working with Luca was a freeing experience. Not just because of what we were doing and the kind of crazy things we do on it, literally because of the way that Luca sets up his the set. Knows exactly what he's doing. Knows everything is under Luca's watchful eye, and he just allowed me and everybody on that set just to be free, to laugh, to have fun, to be playing, and that's the word I would use. We played all the way through that film.
Okay, so the second part of John Barr's question to you.
Well, there's another part.
Yeah, there's another part to it. It's just that, you know, it's a very sexualized character that you don't think about when you think about William Burroughs in a way. And how did you kind of imagine that? How did you kind of reinvent that sense of it? I mean, when you think about him, I mean, most people don't think of him as a sexual character. And you
that's from the book. I mean, that for me was in the book
Really?
in a way that I felt was very plain.
Yeah, he was very modest. He was very like shy in the book in describing the sex, but there always was an ellipse. But leading to that, you knew what was that had to happen in a way. Also, it speaks a lot about this translucent self that reaches out to the other. Everything was in the book, I would say.
Yeah, okay.
Not that was described, but I feel the energy was there.
Yeah.
Also, like, I think that for Burroughs, the wish for contact was everything. And you can see that in his journals, for instance. The song that you hear at the end, which is called Bastards and Empires, and it's been written by Trent Reznor and Ross from lyrics by William Burroughs, from his journals. This is the last entry on his journals before he dies, 3 days before he dies, and it's a beautiful riff on the concept of love, the physical love and the emotional love. So that really was one of the great occupation and preoccupation of Burroughs. He was very controlled. But what is behind that control? What is interesting for us?
Well, I always got the sense that he was never openly gay, or he wouldn't like to admit homosexuality in his own identity.
Certainly repression plays a big, big, big role here.
Yeah.
And I realize that I do a lot of movies about repressed men.
So I understand, you know, I was talking to Chris Vesper and doing some research today, and that there are many iterations of this movie. There's a very long version of this movie.
I think that's inaccurate. We work as filmmakers, and I hope there are some colleagues here tonight, and you can all say yes, that you edit the first pass, then you keep going until the movie presents itself in the shape that it has. Right?
Is there
And of course, in the process, you lose stuff.
Is there anything that you took out of the film that you really wished maybe could go back, or would be another kind of version of this movie?
No, but there is a great scene where Lee goes in bars by himself and bumps into a cantina where he sees some Mexican man dancing, and he meets another young man. It is a very tense moment. That's a beautiful scene. You remember the scene? You have not seen it?
No.
Very good.
It's never no.
It didn't make the cut that I showed.
Yeah.
Daniel, I mean, so in terms of other roles that you've done in comparison to this one, is this the most daring kind of role that you've taken on? Do you feel, or do you think that it's, you know, something?
I don't see it as daring. No, I don't. I mean, I feel like that. I think it's that thing of I'm not really writing a kind of narrative for myself, or kind of doing a diary entry. You know, when I accept a role, I don't sort of think, you know, kind of have to go what I think about it. It's a gut feeling that I go with. you know, I knew I wanted to do it. I had to sit down with Luca.
Did you audition for the role?
Yes, yes, it was a long process. Yeah, he just said, "Do you want to do it?" I said, "Yes, please." Like, and we were shooting when, like 6 months later. Was it that fast?
Yeah, immediately.
Yeah,
You said yes
yeah.
around August, and then
Yeah.
we were prepping in October.
That's right,
and
right.
We were started shooting in May.
That's right. Yeah, yeah.
Great.
So it was very, very quick, which was great, and that, you know, a wonderful way to start it. No, I don't see. I mean, someone said that to me the other day, and I was thinking, well, it's very brave of you, and I don't sort of. I mean, for me, an actor, having had the career I've had and done the things I had, to get an opportunity to do something like this is like, well, it's just a no-brainer. I wouldn't. How could I turn it down?
Yeah. I mean, when I think about 27 years ago, you were doing something as daring as Love Is the Devil, and that was really pushing the envelope. You know. And for you to do this today, it just seems like, wow.
I couldn't have done this.
And
film.
Mother, for example.
I couldn't have done this film when I was doing Bond. It would have felt self-conscious and like I was, you know, trying to show my range. You know, I mean, it's like I really, you know, this it would have felt kind of, and this. So you know, now I'm not doing it, and it suddenly comes along, and I just, you know, it's how blessed I am that it kind of came along right this moment. You know.
I love it. Luca, I know we got to wind up this talk, but one thing I wanted to ask you was, the music in this film is so amazing, and all the choices. I just want to hear how you worked with the creative team, like with Trent Reznor and Atticus, and just I want to hear how that was all put together like that.
I think there are three big streams in this movie from music. One is the music from the places that you hear from jukeboxes and of the time. The other one is like a sort of a little body of music that becomes a character within the characters, that is the bridge between Burroughs and the way in which Burroughs has been always seen as a role model for generations after him. And we started conceptualizing this concept from what we know about the friendship between Burroughs and Kurt Cobain. So that was the setting stone. But we opened with the anguish in the voice of Sinead O'Connor, who sings All Apologies, the day in which Cobain dies of suicide. All these artists that we play in the movie, they were formidable, sensitive artists that died too young, or they had been going through a lot, like Prince and New Order, even the Italian band Verdena, which is fantastic. You hear 2 songs from them. They have a thick experience of life and a very beautiful sense of anguish, I would say, a rock anguish. And then there is Trent Reznor and Atticus Ross, which are my dear friends and wonderful collaborators. This is the movie number 3 with them. And in this case, I asked them to do the most romantic music they could do.
And I just wanted to point out, you know, the production design of this film is so amazing and so beautiful, and it's all shot. Is it all shot in Cinecittà?
We mostly shot, like 98% is shot in Cinecittà and 2% on 2 little locations in Sicily. We have the production designer here.
Yes.
Stefano Paisi is here. I would say at the beginning of it, like Justin is one of the reasons I wanted to make the movie with impetus. One is Daniel and one is Stefano. I wanted to work with these 3 gentlemen and make sure that all of them could expand. In this case, this is the first movie by Stefano, so you should applaud again.
Thank you so much.
Thank you very much.